Now, as a third pair of speakers, let me welcome Professor Markovinovic and Assistant Professor Anton Bilic. I assume, Anton, you're the only one presenting today?
Yes, Christian, you're correct.
Okay. So Professor Markovinovic and Anton will share with us their thoughts on some challenges of digitalization of electronic decision-making, and they will give some de lege ferenda proposals on improving it. So Anton, please, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Christian. I hope that you can see me, hear me, and also see my presentation. Actually, our presentation. I want to say hello and greet everyone, both on my behalf and on behalf of Professor Markovinovic, who isn't presenting today. Thanks to the organizers, especially Professor Horak. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Zvonimir. So it's our pleasure to be presenting. So the topic is electronic decision-making in a limited liability company. Why electronic? Well, it's quite obvious. Everything today is electronic, online, virtual, digital, however you want it. We cannot meet each other as much as we would have wanted, so we have to communicate electronically. Why decision-making? I believe this is a good place in this conference to be talking about that, because we have heard already from previous two presentations something about establishing a registration of a company through electronic means. And now we will see, well, after you have established a company, probably electronically, can you also run it electronically by electronic means of communication? Can a company live, let's say, exclusively via electronic communication? So this is an initial question. First, we have some general remarks, which should apply, I guess, to all legal systems. Some general thoughts about decisions in limited liability companies and about electronic communications. Afterwards, we have some examples from Croatian law. I'm not sure how much I will have time to cover everything, but I will try to do my best. So first, what is decision-making for a limited liability company? Well, everything. I would dare to say that a limited liability company has nothing else except decision-making. It's not a natural person. It doesn't have a personal life. It only has organs who meet. They're usually collegial bodies. They discuss and they reach decisions. And those decisions are considered to be the will, the intent of the company itself. So everything is actually done through decisions. We have here discerned certain most important elements of almost every decision-making in a collegial body in a limited liability company. First, who is authorized to propose a decision? Second, can the people who are deciding have sufficient amount of information in order to reach an informed decision so that it isn't just a blind voting? Third, is there a quorum? Fourth, majority, which is required. And fifth, the form in which the decision has to be made in order to be valid, and also registration of that decision. So all of these factors are very, very much important when we will think about electronic communication applied to decision-making in an LLC. Also, what we have to take into account, the number of people involved. It's not the same if you have, let's say, 3 directors in a board of directors, or you have thousands of shareholders in a general meeting. So these are great differences which have to be taken into account when discussing electronic communications. Something about electronic communication. Well, I would dare to say that it is so good nowadays that it can almost replace everything. Well, maybe it's not as good as a real in-person meeting, but it is really good. I hope that you can hear me, see my presentation. So everything actually that you would be able in real life. We're getting more and more used to doing things online. So why not also in a limited liability company? What is important? These 2 aspects which we have distinguished. Electronic communication conveys a message, but also records it very, very easily. It's very easily to record even a video. The degree of reliability and security of recording they can vary. But for example, you also have blockchain technology, which is almost immutable. So there are technological ways to make recordings of decisions very, very reliable. So what can we say about electronic decision-making in a limited liability company? There are two, let's say, main ways. One would be pure exclusive electronic communication. This would mean that all persons communicating are using only electronic devices. So no in-person hearing. Second option would be a hybrid option. For example, that there are 3 directors meeting in person and 3 directors who communicate electronically with those 3 persons. A hybrid version would also be that you have a general meeting which is taking place physically. You have their directors, maybe public notary, but you also have participation by electronic communication. So this would be hybrid way of decision making. Now the question is very much of regulation, of law, of statute. Does the law and will it allow electronic decision making? And there are at least 2 very important aspects which have to be taken into account. First, we call objective. So can electronic communication meet the same requirements, reach the same standards as in-person communication? If it can, and usually it can, there is no reason why legislator should not allow electronic communication. So this is this objective standard. Can we, for example, if we need if we need direct communication, is electronic communication sophisticated enough in order to allow it? If we need a high degree of reliability of recording, do we use the technology which meets that standard? If this is so, I see no reason against applying, at least as an option, electronic communications in an LLC. Second aspect is subjective. Even if technology is perfect, even if it is better than in-person hearing, some people could be against it. And this is a legitimate concern. This is not something, we should not dismiss it easily and say, well, those people should learn. Maybe they know how to use it. Maybe they're uneasy about it. They don't want to do that. So there has to be a room for a company to decide, usually through articles of association, but also maybe in some other ways, such as bylaws. A statute could only here specify a default rule, so that the company then would have an option to opt in or opt out. For example, electronic communication could be a default rule, so a company would have to opt out if it doesn't want an electronic communication. And also statute could put in-person meeting as a default option, and then company would have to opt in electronic communication. So this is something also that legislator has to have in mind when choosing. So advantages and disadvantages, probably you already know them. There are many advantages. It's faster, cheaper, epidemiologically safer. Often it's easier to record electronic communications. So they're really great. The biggest problem, the biggest disadvantage is this third one, if you're following the presentation. Some technology bottlenecks. If transmission breaks, if authentication is not sufficient, if privacy is endangered, it is possible not only that the quality will be diminished, but that the decision may be legally challenged. This is especially true in regard to the decisions of the general meeting. So this is something which has to be really carefully thought by the legislator, because if here is any place for doubts, this could result in many lawsuits where shareholders will challenge these decisions of general meeting before courts, which is something that needs to be avoided. So maybe this is the biggest bottleneck. It can be solved, but smart regulatory solutions are actually required. So yeah, Also, maybe final thoughts from this section about possible long-term effects. So not only that electronic communication may replace the existing communication, but it could lead to a long-term change of rules, because electronic communication, it offers some advantages which were not possible before. So it is possible that actually rules will be adapted, and the relationship, corporate governance, will be maybe different by taking into account the possibilities of electronic communication. Well, I'm aware that I have maybe, just a couple of more minutes. So of course, I won't talk much about Croatian law, but I was aware of that before. You will be able to read it in our paper when we write it. But just a couple of brief remarks. In Croatian law, at least in public limited liability companies, you have management board, supervisory board, and general meeting. In regard to management board, statute is very liberal, so there is no problem in communicating electronically. In supervisory board, this is also allowed, but the default rule is only if no member of supervisory board objects. So if companies want to communicate in supervisory board limitless, it would be advisable for them to put that down in the article of association. And of course, and I will finish with that, general meeting is the most sensitive part. We have adopted the shareholders' right directive, which provides for such solution. Actually, we have adopted it for every public limited company, but maybe our way of adopting it is not perfect for some technical reasons, but I don't have time and maybe be even too boring for you to go into details, but who is interested, of course, will be able to read about it more in our paper. So thank you very much for following me, and questions I will be glad to answer. Thank you, Christian, and this ends my presentation.
Thank you, Anton. So for an interesting presentation, now I have a question for you, but I will pose it later on.